In this lesson, we're going to look specifically at the vascular system within a plant. So, the role of the vascular system is translocation, and translocation is the movement of materials from one part of a plant to another. So, there are two types of specialized tissues that are used to carry out translocation. So, the first is the xylem, which is going to carry water and minerals from the roots of the plant up to the stem and the leaves. So, it carries water and minerals in that one direction only, up the plant. Whereas phloem transports organic materials throughout the plant in whatever direction it needs. So let's first look at the xylem. So the structure of the xylem, it consists of long, mainly hollow tubes, which are formed by non-living cell walls of either tracheids or vessel elements. Okay, so hollow tubes, and important point here is that xylem is non-living. So it's basically just the remaining cell walls. So they have no cytoplasm, nucleus, or other organelles, and so the water can just move easily through the tubes. And then they have a lot of pits in the cell wall, which allows the water to flow in and out of the adjoining cells. So how is water moved in the xylem? So water is first absorbed from the soil by the process of osmosis. So from an area where there's lots of water into the roots where there's less water. And so this occurs through the root hairs. The water then travels to the xylem, which is found in the center of the root. And it's transported in the xylem up against gravity through the stems to the leaves. And this occurs because of the process of transpiration that is happening at the leaves. So transpiration is the loss of water vapor from the leaves and stems of plants. So basically it's evaporation. So the water is going from a liquid to a gas. And when that evaporation is specifically happening at the leaves or stems of plants, it's called transpiration. So when a water molecule evaporates from the leaves, it leaves a little space, basically, and another molecule moves up to replace it. And so what this does is it creates a low pressure or a suction inside the xylem, which is called the transpiration pull. And so this suction extends all the way down through the xylem. There's an unbroken column of water from where the vapor is evaporating all the way down to the roots. So in this diagram, that just shows so the water is being lost by transpiration at the leaves. It's creating a suction, and through capillary action, the water is moving up, and then it's more of it is absorbed by the root hairs from the ground. So the columns of water that are in the xylem don't break. It's a solid column, and this is because of the special property of water, which is that it can create hydrogen bonds. Right? It's a polar molecule. And so there's what's called cohesion between the water molecules. So they're all stuck together through the hydrogen bonds, and that's called cohesion. And the other thing the water does it adheres to the wall of the xylem vessel. So the wall of the vessel is also polar so that the water can stick to it. And that's called adhesion. So this little image is just showing that cohesion is the water molecules stuck together, so kind of holding hands. And then adhesion is when the water molecules are holding on to the wall or whatever other charged object. This is just another diagram that shows the water that comes in at the roots and out at the leaves. There's the electron micrograph of the water conducting cells. And then at a molecular level, the water molecules hold on to each other by cohesion and onto the wall by adhesion. So now let's talk about the phloem. So one of the differences between xylem and phloem is that phloem consists of living cells. So it consists of cells called sieve tube members and then companion cells that are right beside them. And the cell walls of the sieve tube members are porous so that materials can go in and out. And the companion cells provide energy to pump the substances where they're needed. So, movement of molecules in the phloem requires energy. It's an active process, whereas the movement of water in the xylem doesn't require energy from the plant. So, it's called a passive process. So, in the phloem, you have the transport of organic materials such as sugars and amino acids. And so these materials are loaded into the phloem in parts of the plant called the source. So a source might be the stems, the leaves, the storage organs like the roots. Okay, so whatever it is you're talking about, sugar, amino acid is loaded in, that's called the source. And then it's translocated to the sink where it's unloaded. So the point of unloading is called the sink. So this might be the roots, it might be growing fruits, or really leaves when they first start budding. So let's talk a little bit about sugars and how they're produced and stored. And so they're produced in a certain form, right? They're produced as glucose, right? Photosynthesis is creating glucose at the leaves. If the glucose isn't immediately used by the leaf for the processes it needs energy for, then it's converted into starch grains in the chloroplast. And then if that glucose or that sugar needs to be transported to somewhere else in the leaf, the starch is broken down into sucrose for transport in the phloem. So the image shows you that glucose is what's called a monosaccharide. There's just sort of one glucose ring. Sucrose is a disaccharide. There's two. And then starch is a polysaccharide. So it's a really long chain of glucose stuck together. And so those are the forms that the sugar can take within the plant. If the sucrose is transported to the root for long term storage, it's converted to starch. And when it's required, that starch that's being stored in the roots can be broken down into sucrose and transported throughout the plant. And once the sucrose reaches its destination, it's converted back to glucose, which can be used for energy through cellular respiration. So the key thing to remember here is that the glucose is the form that the sugar is first made in, or the form that is required if you want to use the energy. The sucrose is the form that is used for transport, and the starch is the form that is used for storage. So, how do these things get moved around the plant? So, the transport of organic molecules around plants is termed active translocation because it requires energy. That's what the active part means. So, the pressure flow model explains how these materials can be pushed from a source to a sink. So, for the pressure flow model at the source, sucrose is actively transported into the sieve tubes with the help of the companion cells. And so now, because there's more sucrose in the sieve tubes, so sucrose is the solute, so there's more of it, water is also going to move into the sieve tubes to try to dilute that sucrose. So the movement of the water in there causes an increased pressure within the phloem. So then at the sink, the sucrose is actively being transported out where it's needed. So this decreases the solute concentration. So now there's less sucrose in that region of the phloem. So the water is also going to move out. So you can think of it as the water always follows the sucrose. So if the sucrose goes in, the water goes in. If the sucrose goes out, the water goes out. And so what that does at the sink, the water goes out. This decreases the pressure at the sink. So we have a region of high pressure at the source and a region of low pressure at the sink. And so that creates a pressure gradient, and the solution flows from where it's high pressure to low pressure to try to even out the pressure. So that's how the pressure flow model works to move sucrose and other organic materials around the plant. So those are the two parts of the vascular system, the xylem and the phloem, and how they work to transport things around the plant.